To Venezuela now, and with the US ramping up its pressure campaign against the regime of President Nicolas Maduro, European political actors are starting to weigh up their involvement. While the Venezuelan opposition leader, María Corina Machado, travelled to Oslo this week to receive her Nobel Peace Prize, the situation for citizens in Venezuela has remained dire for many years. DW's Jack Parrock takes a look at how Europe might position itself diplomatically.
A wanted man. The US government has put out a $50 million reward against the Venezuelan president, accusing him of trafficking drugs and weapons into the US. Nicolas Maduro has led an authoritarian communist regime since taking power in 2013. In the past 2 months, the US has increased its presence in the Caribbean next to Venezuela, so around 25% of its military is now stationed there. And then it closed the airspace over the country entirely, many seeing it as a signal of impending war.
They want to drive Maduro from power. They think that if they drive Maduro from power, that means that the Cuban regime is also falling, the Nicaraguan regime is also falling. But the US could really be walking into a very disastrous war here. This is precisely where Europe could step in, to working together with other Latin American governments and say, let's find a way to de-escalate this.
Venezuela's historical ties with Spain make Madrid the major diplomatic player in Europe on this issue. But the socialist government of Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez didn't recognize Venezuelan opposition leader Edmundo González Urrutia as the winner of the disputed 2024 elections. The European Parliament did, however, and Spain's opposition party here says the government needs to act.
I would not, of course, help or recommend any invasion or anything like that, but to help the political opposition and, the democracy fighters inside Venezuela. This is what we have to do now most actively.
Having just been almost entirely sidelined out of the US-led negotiations on peace talks for Ukraine, I pressed the EU here in Brussels about whether they're concerned the White House will carve them out again regarding Venezuela.
Let's not mix up topics, right? Because you brought together Venezuela, closure of airspace, and discussions about Ukraine, which is a totally different topic. I'm not aware of any further issues or elements to be shared here on that question, Jack.
Still struggling now to even project an image of EU foreign policy strength. But with ever-increasing pressure from the US on the country holding the world's largest proven oil reserves, international attention is going to have to be refocused on Venezuela.
We can find out more from DW's Christine Mundwa, who joins us now from Brussels. So, Christine, has the EU said anything concrete about these latest US actions in Venezuela?
Well, Anya, in short, it would be no, and it is the EU's custom not to really comment on matters of national interest, so to say, as it pertains to other countries, especially when it comes to allies. And what's been tricky here is that the EU has not wanted to put itself in a position where it's criticizing an ally, that being the United States. You will recall that the UN condemned the US's airstrikes on those boats in the Caribbean and the Pacific. And the EU would ordinarily echo such a condemnation from the United Nations. But given that the European Union is trying to sort of maintain good ties with the US because of the effort that's required in Ukraine, you could almost guarantee that even behind closed doors, so many conversations wouldn't be happening between Brussels and Washington. There just isn't the kind of rapport right now. Having said that, though, there are concerns, particularly concerns about those boat strikes. I know there would be reservations about the US planning a ground invasion, but policymakers here, especially at a very high level, wouldn't come on record to voice those concerns at all.
So, Christine, the EU doesn't want to criticise the US, but what about the EU's own policy towards Venezuela, and notably towards Nicolas Maduro? Where does it stand on his leadership?
Well, the EU maintains that the Maduro government, that Nicolas Maduro himself as president of Venezuela, lacks legitimacy. And in fact, it is official policy that Brussels is in contact with the opposition in Venezuela. To an extent, some opposition figures have been hiding out in European Union countries. And so that is firmly the position. And in fact, for a long time, the EU has been speaking out against the government in Venezuela. The last sort of high-level engagement with Venezuela would have been in November, when the European Union had its summit with the leaders of the Caribbean and Latin American countries. Nicolas Maduro didn't come to the gathering, but he did send his foreign minister. This is also a time when the European Union is trying to strengthen ties and cement bonds with other countries around the world, at a time when the geopolitical situation is changing, where the position with the relationship with the United States itself is being called into question. So firmly, the Maduro government is also in the EU sights, because a lot of the drug trafficking activities that are happening, where Venezuela is accused of facilitating some of that drug trafficking, it is creating a problem here in the European Union, where a lot of cocaine is flooding the European streets. So in that sense, you will have the European Union trying or supporting, and you've heard this from the High Representative, this is the EU's chief diplomat, saying we support the US's actions to clamp down on this drug trafficking trade. Of course, not explicitly supporting the boat strikes or whatever, but to that extent, the Maduro regime is seen as illegitimate.
Thanks so much, Christine. That's DW's Brussels correspondent, Christine Mwundwa.